we're going to examine and benchmark each of the graphics settings in Fortnite using an older entry-level GPU. The GPU we selected as a good low-spec example is the NVIDIA GeForce GT 610. This entry-level card was first introduced in early 2012, has 48 CUDA cores, and 1GB of memory. I'll put more details up on the screen. Now, everyone's setup is different, but this should give you a good example that you can use when comparing it to your own entry-level configuration. So let's get straight into it. First up, it's window mode. Looking through the options, we have full screen, window full screen, and windowed modes. Examining the frame rates for each mode shows that at least for this setup, there is very little difference performance-wise between full screen and windowed full screen modes. Windowed full screen mode does need to be run at the same resolution as the monitor, however. So for most users, I'd recommend sticking with full screen mode. If you're running with more than one screen or need to switch back and forth between other programs while running Fortnite and your machine can handle it, then I'd recommend using windowed full screen mode. So, what's next? Next up, it's resolution. Resolution is the primary graphics setting, and along with window mode, should usually be selected first before the other graphics settings. Resolution represents the overall number of pixels that are displayed on your screen and has the greatest effect on both the quality of the picture as well as the frame rate. Using the 1280 by 720 resolution as our base frame rate, we also examined the 900 and 1080 resolutions as well. Comparing each setting side by side, we can see how the overall picture quality changes as we increase resolution, as well as how the frame rate decreases significantly. Since we want the highest FPS possible, and since the GT 610 is such an old card, we're going to go ahead and select the 720 resolution. If you have newer or more powerful hardware, you may want to set your resolution to something higher. Next up, it's Vsync. Vsync stands for vertical sync. This setting will synchronize the game frame rate with your monitor's refresh rate. We can see in the example the difference in frame rate between Vsync off and Vsync on. The refresh rate of the monitor in the test machine is 60 Hz, so the frame rate became locked at 60. This setting can be useful with some hardware, especially with older monitors where an effect called screen tearing occurs. Screen tearing is where two frames occupy the screen at the same time. Vsync can help to prevent this from happening. For our test system, we're going to go ahead and keep this to off. Next up, it's frame rate limit. Similar to Vsync, frame rate limit will set the game to have a certain highest limit in frame rate. For instance, setting frame rate limit to 120 FPS will limit the game to rendering a maximum of 120 frames per second. This setting can be useful if your frame rate often fluctuates wildly to give your gameplay a smoother, more consistent feel. Also, if you have problems with textures loading in too slowly, especially when using older mechanical hard disk drives, setting frame rate limit to one of the lower settings can often help. For our test system, we're going to go ahead and keep this on unlimited. Next up, it's rendering mode. Rendering mode selects which programming interface is used to render the actual game. Looking at the selections of DirectX 11, Performance, and DirectX 12, we can see that DirectX 12 is not available at all. That's because the GT 610 GPU we're testing with only supports a DirectX 11 feature set. Choosing between DirectX 11 and Performance, we're going to stick with Performance mode. Performance mode disables many of the advanced rendering features, allowing far greater frame rates with older and lower-end hardware. That being said, if you're using significantly more powerful hardware than what we're testing with, you may want to look into DirectX 11 or DirectX 12. Next up, it's 3D resolution. 3D resolution is a resolution scaling technique that can significantly help to increase frame rates. At percentages lower than 100, the game is rendered in a resolution lower than what is selected in the resolution setting. Then, the picture is resized back up to the stated resolution. Looking at examples for 3D resolutions of 100, 75, 50, and 37, we can see a massive increase to frame rate as the amount of scaling increases. Making use of this setting can make even the most low-end potato computers capable of running at a decent frame rate. Now for our test machine, we're going to leave this setting on 100 for now. However, when playing in a large game with a lot of action on the screen, if we do start to encounter frame rate issues, this would be a good setting we might eventually bump down to 75 or 80%. Next up, it's view distance. View distance affects how far away you can see certain objects. These objects include things like player builds, vehicles, chests, and loot in general. A higher view distance helps prevent objects from popping in too close to you. One thing view distance does not affect, however, is how far away other players appear. Other players will always appear from a preset distance for everyone, regardless of their setting. Looking at the examples, we can see how the number of structures we can see in the distance increases as the setting increases. With only a 5.8% hit to performance at the highest level, we're going to be choosing the epic setting for our test machine. Next up, it's textures. The textures setting affects the quality and sharpness of objects and surfaces. A higher texture setting will give objects a more detailed appearance. Looking at each of the settings side by side, we can see some quality differences between the pictures. In particular, focusing on the awning and brick wall between the low and medium settings, and focusing on the patch of dirt in the high and epic settings gives us some good examples. With a hit to frame rate of only 2.2% for medium setting, along with the most noticeable change in picture quality between the settings, we're going to go with medium for our test machine. Now, as far as the high resolution textures are concerned, if you're interested in using the higher resolution textures, you may need to download them first. To do this, first open the Epic Games launcher and select the options section for Fortnite. The size of the texture pack currently comes in at 8.7 gigabytes. So if you're really low on storage space, you may or may not need to give this one a pass. Next up, it's meshes. Meshes make up the internal frame or skeleton of objects. A higher quality mesh will give objects a more detailed shape. After comparing low and high mesh settings in a number of different situations, at least for this machine, there doesn't appear to be any noticeable difference. However, in all the tests we performed, the high mesh setting achieved a higher frame rate consistently with no noticeable difference in input lag. So at least for this machine, we're going to go with the high setting. Depending on your setup, your mileage may vary. So there you have it, Fortnite graphics settings compared using a low-spec, entry-level GPU. Now just a word of warning, while these frame rates are meant to show the difference between the settings, frame rates in the middle of combat will tend to be lower. In the heat of battle, with people running around, shooting and building everywhere, your frame rate, especially on a low-end machine, could easily drop to 50% of what it was versus just standing still. All that being said, good luck and thanks for watching.